Hello?
There you go.
There we go. All right, much better. Now everybody can hear me, and he can hear me as well. All right, well, I'll get started again. So my name's Maura. I'm with the Clean Water Compliance Unit. Today I'm going to be talking about the Construction General Permit Renewal. Our unit, the Clean Water Compliance Unit, we're the folks that are responsible for the inspections. So we call that compliance assurance, and then also compliance assistance. And that's why I'm here today, is to really get you guys trained, give you a first look maybe into the Construction General Permit Renewal. Before I get started, I really want to thank the 521 Drainage Authority. This is huge. This is going to be the kickoff to all of our training that we're going to be hosting on the Construction General Permit. And I'll tell you what, it's awesome to be down here in the Western Slope and kicking off the training. We have a pretty packed class here. I know Scott's going to be here all week teaching, and I hear those classes are really full. And that speaks a lot to the municipality. Mark, who's out in the field working with all you guys, the folks in the office doing the review of the plans, just getting everybody in this area trained. So I want to thank them for hosting, for advertising, and getting you all here today. So thank you. I'm going to go over the agenda. Maybe that's not working. Okay. So we have a lot to cover. Like I said, there's a lot of information on these slides. I did provide these slides to the 521 Drainage Authority, so if you want a copy, they might make it available, or they're going to make this training available online. I definitely recommend it because, like I said, I'm going to go through a lot of information, and we only have 2 hours today. First thing we're going to do, we're going to touch on the scope of the construction permits that are within the Clean Water Compliance Unit. We're going to go through the changes in the construction stormwater permit. That's really probably why most folks are here. Some of those changes to the erosion and sediment controls, to the stormwater management plan, updates to site inspections, and then the administrative requirements. Has everybody been aware of CEOS or heard of CEOS? It's an online application system, which I'm going to briefly get into at the end. I'm going to go through some of the available resources that our group has put together and put out for compliance assistance. I have some copies here as well, so feel free to take some copies, or please get it online. All the information is available online. At the end, we're actually going to split this up into 2 parts. We're going to do the first section about an hour and do some questions. We'll take a break, come back, we'll do the second part, and then questions again. I know a lot of folks that are here are going to be here all week, or parts of the training that are coming up this week. So if we don't get to your question today, hopefully we'll have an opportunity in the next couple days to address your question. All right, let's get started. I wanted to go through the general permits just to give folks an idea of how much is authorized and issued through the Water Quality Control Division. So the permitted universe. Construction stormwater, you'll see the first line, it's by far our largest permit universe. We have about 4,800 active permits right now. So that's about 5,000 permittees all throughout the state. We get about 2,400 applications a year. And that's really why this is such a beast. It's going to be a big renewal that comes up on April 1st when this goes live. And this gives you a little bit of an idea of what the division is facing, as well as we know you guys are facing a lot of changes as well. Dewatering. There's about 250 active permits right now, and we get about 230 applications a year. Those are typically very short term, so it's about a 1-to-1 ratio. Remediation, we currently have 75 permits, and we get about 50 applications a year. Hydrostatic, which is pipeline testing, we have about 24, and we get about 11 applications a year. The city and county permits, so the permit that the 521 Drainage Authority has, those are for the urbanized area, the municipality, the municipal storm sewer system. We have 64 of those. Non-standard, which are schools and metro districts, we have about 61 of those. So you can see that's a lot of work going through the permits to get those certifications written, the general permit written, and then us out in the field to inspect to. I want to talk about some of how we're organized. I know it's very hard, and I've been with the division for about 10 years, so I definitely understand this, that I'm the face of the division. No one really cares if I'm a permit writer or if I'm an inspector. They don't really understand. They see us all as one and the same, but actually we are very divided, and we kind of work in silos, to be honest. The permit section is the group that actually writes the permits and issues the certifications. The compliance unit, where I am housed, we're tasked with doing the inspections and compliance assistance to those permits written by the permit section. In our group, we have 9 FTE. When I started, there were 2.5 covering the entire state, and now we're up till 9. So I'm sure you guys have noticed we're conducting a lot more inspections. 80% of our time is dedicated to construction stormwater. And that makes sense after seeing those numbers, because that's our largest permitted universe. Then you have our enforcement unit, right? So unfortunately, any inspection or violation through a discharge monitoring report is subject to enforcement. Enforcement is a different group, and if our group goes out, does an inspection, we see violations, we can recommend that inspection go to enforcement. Enforcement unit also does DMR, the discharge monitoring reports oversight, so they issue compliance advisories for late discharge monitoring reports, exceedances, or incomplete information. But just so you understand, there's handoffs between permits, compliance, and enforcement. All right, how did we get here? Why did it take so long? I've been with the division 10 years. This is my first general permit renewal. So this will be the biggest general permit that I've ever gone through as far as training, guidance documents, and issuing all new certifications. So it's going to be a beast. Why does it take so long? Regulatory requirements say, and those are the federal requirements, that we have to issue our permits, renew our permits every 5 years. We're now way past that. So the first couple years, it was really due to resources. I mentioned we have 4,800 certifications. So that's a lot of people to train, a lot of certifications to issue, plus the permit's just a beast. It's very active, there's a lot of stakeholders, so we just didn't have the resources for it. It's been administratively extended since 2012. So a lot of folks in this room have probably worked under one permit and have gotten very used to this permit, how it's written, how we inspect to it. So this is really going to be a big change. I want to mention that the EPA has their own construction general permit. And when we renew, we're responsible for incorporating their permit requirements into our permit. So we have to be as stringent or meet the intent of the EPA construction general permit. That's one thing you're going to see in this permit, are the federal effluent limitation guidelines. Federal effluent limitation guidelines, ELGs, as I'll refer to it throughout the presentation, they're national regulatory standards based on the performance of treatment and control technologies. So 2012, 2016, we started getting more staff, and we knew we were really far behind from the EPA. They've already issued their general permit. They've gone through a cycle. It's about time we issue a new permit. In 2016, we did our first public notice. So it goes out to public notice and allows stakeholders to review it, comment on it, get an idea of where the division is going. And during that time, in 2016, we also did a series of stakeholder meetings, primarily in the Front Range. But we had trainings and talked about the major changes. We took a lot of questions. We incorporated some of those comments into the second public notice that was out in 2018. 2018, not only were those comments incorporated in that second public notice, but a big change is Part 2 of the permit. Part 2 permit language is very legal. It's who can sign, how do I, report a noncompliance. And our Part 2 has been changing over the years throughout all of our permits. So now Part 2 is going to be the same throughout all of our permits. So that's individual permits. If you're mine, metal mine, big industrial discharger like cores, your Part 2 is going to look the same as the construction general permit Part 2. But lucky us, everybody in the room, we got to see it first. So Part 2 is going live with this permit because it's the largest universe for certifications and permittees. The permit is finally issued in early 2018, but we did a delayed effective date. And that's where we are right now. We're in this really interesting gray area before it goes live or issued on April 1st. What we're doing now is we're trying to do training, provide guidance. We have a lot of guidance I'll be going through at the end of the presentation. We're going to be doing about 8 other trainings all over the state. The one at the division, which is, I believe, February 27th, you can call into. So you'll hear the same slides. We're all presenting the same information. It's just going to be somebody else presenting it. But if you have time at your desk, like I said, this is a lot of information. I'd recommend calling in, and hearing this stuff multiple times does not hurt. I know myself going through, preparing for this presentation, going through the compliance documents, it's really helped me understand and how to work through this permit. So April 1st, that's what we're gearing up for. April 1st, this permit will be issued, it will be effective, and that's when your changes need to be incorporated in the field and in your records with your plan, your stormwater management plan, your site inspections, April 1st. So you have some time. Definitely don't wait. Start making those changes. If we were to do an inspection between now and April 1st, and you've made all the changes to the renewal permit, you're going to be compliant because the language is just more clear. It's a little bit more stringent in some cases. So don't worry about being out of compliance with the current permit if you start incorporating the changes to the renewal permit. Okay, let's get into some of the changes. First and foremost, I want to start off by saying the overall goal of the permit has not changed. Discharges cannot have a potential to cause an exceedance to water quality standards, including narrative standards. So that's still the same goal. So we're allowing discharges from construction sites. However, they must protect water quality. Okay, comprehensive changes, let's start there first. They're the easiest to see, probably the easiest to digest. The major change, we're having a new numbering system. Why are we doing that to everybody? Well, to be honest, we were just running out of numbers to issue certifications. So we had to come up with a new number. It's going to be a little confusing for a while, and I'm sure people will forget and refer back to their 03, but it will all be under 04. So that's a new permit series. Everybody who is currently issued a permit right now will be issued a new certification come April 1st, and it will have a new number. Whoever gets COR 040001, save it, put it on the wall. The next major change, when you just get through and you look at it and you start reading the permit, it just looks different. We did a lot of reformatting, and the point of that reformatting was really to help it be more clear, easy to read, a lot less duplicative requirements, a lot less cross-referencing from one section of the permit to another section of the permit. There is still some of that. I know this going through it, but we did try to limit as much as we could. We incorporated those federal effluent limitation guidelines, the ELGs, because they're already live in that construction general permit from the federal government. that's a big chunk of those changes to this renewal permit. There's some terminology changes for sure. So control measure, that's a big terminology change. Everybody's used to BMP, best management practice. Now we're saying control measure. It's the same thing. It's just more comprehensive. If you say BMP, I'm not going to ask you to give me $1. I know what you're talking about. So don't get so caught up, because really the intent is the same. You'll see some other changes like receiving water and receiving stream. But a really nice feature to this renewal permit is there's linked definitions throughout the permit. So if you see control measure, you can click on it and it's going to take you right to that definition. So it's pretty fancy. Okay, now let's get into the changes. Allowable non-stormwater discharges. Anything in this presentation, I should mention, that's in yellow is the change. So focus your eyes on that. So the permit still covers construction activity, construction support activities, borrow and fill sites, dedicated asphalt or concrete plants. However, now you have masonry mixing stations. That's always been an activity and pollutant source that you'll see at construction sites. Now we just call it out. So clear, simple language. Now we'll get into the allowable non-stormwater discharges. Apologize, there's so much information I had to do notes. So again, the permit allows the discharges of uncontaminated springs, concrete washout water to the ground, landscape irrigation return flow, and emergency firefighting activities. So that has not changed. You'll notice that the renewal permit doesn't mention or talk about construction dewatering. That's because the division actually has a low-risk discharge policy for the discharges of uncontaminated groundwater to land. So that low-risk discharge policy meets the intent of what the construction general permit was covering. So we just took it out. If you go to our website, I'll have a link at the end, you can see that low-risk discharge policy. So it's not that you can't conduct that activity, you just need to conduct that activity in a certain way and follow that guidance. If you need to discharge that water, you're looking at a separate permit, a construction dewatering or a remediation permit. Okay, let's get into control measure requirements. I mentioned the terminology change from BMPs to control measure. Again, I say it's more comprehensive because it's practices, procedures, anything you're implementing at site to minimize the discharge of potential pollutants. Minimize, that term is a new term. It is an EPA term. We have put it on the state into other general permits. If anybody in the room has an industrial stormwater permit or a sand and gravel permit, they'll be familiar with this term minimize. It's all throughout those other general permits. So what does minimize mean? This means reduce or eliminate to the extent achievable using control measures that are technologically available and economically practical and achievable in light of best industry practice. So you're going to see this when you're talking about control measures, because you have to implement control measures to minimize the discharge of potential pollutant sources. The permit does not impose numeric effluent limits, so you're not sampling and monitoring. There's no limitation for total suspended solids or E. coli. It's all practice-based. So even though the term minimize is new in the permit, nothing has changed about the need to have control measures for pollutant sources. Okay, control measures continued. So standard language from the old permit, control measures must be selected, designed, installed, and maintained in accordance with good engineering, hydrologic, and pollution control practices. Everybody in this room should be familiar with that term. The uniqueness now is that control measures must be in place prior to the start of disturbance. So an example, if you have a large project, you have 50 to 100 acres of land, you want to phase that, because as soon as you break ground, you need to have an adequate control measure for that area disturbance. So it's really important, how can you plan ahead and phase? Limit your amount of disturbance, and then you limit the amount of control measures you need to have in place and to have an effective operating condition throughout the life of your permit. A lot of municipalities, and I apologize, I asked Mark, if they have a pre-con meeting. So that's very common. You come out, are control measures in place at that time?
Maybe not at that time. Shortly after the board.
We see that a lot in the Front Range where they have the pre-con meeting, and it's a great opportunity to go over and meet with your municipality and say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're planning, and you'll talk about where you're going to put your control measures. So prior to the start of construction disturbance. So here's an example of some clear language, but new language in the renewal permit. Stormwater runoff must flow to at least one control measure to minimize sediment. So it's a very clear requirement. Control measures must contain or filter flows to prevent the bypass of flows without treatment. So areas of disturbance must go to a control measure, and those control measures must either filter to prevent the bypass of flow or contain it. So let's think about this. If you have an area of a disturbance, you're doing some residential building, you're clearing the lot, you're digging the foundation, and you have inlet protection. That does not meet the intent of this section. Inlet protection allows for bypass of flows. So you must have another adequate control measure down gradient prior to going to the inlet protection. The reason why inlet protection is not an adequate sole control measure is because it has to have that bypass, because you don't want your streets flooding during a huge storm event. So if you have bypass, it negates the effectiveness of the control measure to treat all that sediment. So think about that when you're doing your work and installing control measures. More on control measures for erosion and sediment control. Control measures must be appropriate for stormwater runoff for disturbed areas and for the expected flow conditions. Key, expected flow. Control measures must be selected, designed, installed, and adequately sized in accordance with good engineering, hydrologic, and pollution control practices. So the two nuances, expected flow and adequately sized. The drafter of the permit was, during the permit renewal process, also an inspector. And so she took a lot of our inspections and incorporated that into this permit. And what we often see in the field is that control measures are overwhelmed. People don't take into account the size of disturbance, how much flow is going to that control measure. So now think about that. Some examples, some real common examples. Silt fence and straw wattle, if you're using those as control measure for areas of disturbance. 1/4 acre per 100 lineal feet of fence. I know we see up in the Front Range, whole site graded, big development. It's, the perimeter control is silt fence, and that's the only control measure. It's not adequately sized, and it's not going to handle the expected flow from that area. Another example, sediment basins. Take into account how much area is draining to your sediment basin. When you're doing those calculations, you want to take into account paved areas. Anything that's been, concrete, the sidewalk, the street, that's going to have more flow going to your basin. So now adequately sized for expected flows. Going on with control measures. Previous permit, it required a vehicle tracking control program. So you could do whatever you wanted. Now, always take into account where you're working, in what municipality, because the municipality may have more stringent requirements. And if 521 Drainage Authority requires you to have a tracking control device at the entrance to each site, then that's what you need. But the state permit, what it requires, the facility implement vehicle tracking controls to minimize vehicle tracking, or ensure that areas where tracking occurs flow to at least one control measure. So again, building on what I previously discussed, areas of disturbance go to one control, at least one control. The language also states this may be accomplished through filter, settling, or straining. So giving you examples of how you can implement and put in a tracking control for areas of tracking. We want to drive home that, again, inlet protection for those areas where vehicle tracking is going to occur is not going to be adequate because you're going to have bypass of flows going into that inlet. So think about your municipality, what your municipality's requirements are for vehicle tracking. Also, what does your plan say? So whatever your plan says, that's what you have to have implemented in the field. Sediment control measures continued. Install outlets that withdraw water from or near the surface when discharging from basins and impoundments, unless infeasible. So examples, when you're discharging from an impoundment, a riser pipe or a skimmer is going to be installed in your sediment basin. We've had a lot of questions on this. There are a lot of questions during the renewal process and the response to comments. So what about permanent water quality features? Do you have to change those? You would if you want to use those permanent water quality ponds as control measures for the construction phase. So if you're using it as a control measure, you want to modify it during the construction phase. Riser pipe, plate, something that's going to filter and settle those flows. If you don't plan on using your permanent pond and you have other adequate controls, then it's not necessary. I want to touch on infeasible. You've already heard me say that a couple times. So let's do the definition of infeasible. It is an EPA term. It's in relation to those federal effluent limitation guidelines. Infeasible means not technologically possible or not economically practical and achievable in light of best industry practice. So it's really going to be site by site. And I can't give you specifics on what's going to be infeasible. It's really up to the site, the conditions, soil conditions, areas, and that's, kind of, we'll have to talk about that as you get into your site. Control measures continued for erosion and sediment control. This is an ELG, an effluent limitation guideline. So maintain pre-existing vegetation or equivalent control measures for areas within 50 horizontal feet of receiving waters unless infeasible. This was not required in the previous permit, though many stormwater management plans encourage vegetation as maintenance. It's a good practice. The less you disturb, the less you have to control. Maintain basically means do not disturb. Infeasible, again, case-by-case basis. But examples of where it's not going to be infeasible, what if my project is in stream? Are you going to be able to maintain 50 feet of vegetation? So think about your sites, what's going to work. Any existing project where areas have already been disturbed, it's infeasible. It's going to be grandfathered in under this permit. MS4 systems, so your storm sewer systems, does that mean 50 feet of that curb and gutter? What we're talking about for the 50 feet is streams, arroyos, borrow ditches, running water. If it's infeasible, what the permit says is that you have to implement equivalent control measures. So if you can't keep that 50 feet of vegetation, you want to implement an erosion or sediment control that's going to treat that area of disturbance. Control measures continued, another federal effluent limitation guideline. Minimize compaction where infiltration control measures will occur or where final stabilization will be achieved through vegetation. Soil compaction increases the rates of runoff. And if you're trying to filter, you're not going to get any filtering. So think of where cars and trucks are accessing your site. Are they driving all over? Limit access to your site. That will really help with soil compaction. So again, achieving by minimizing site access and especially once final stabilization measures are in place. Control measures continued. Another federal effluent limitation guideline. Unless infeasible, preserve topsoil for areas of the site that will be vegetated for final stabilization. The topsoil layer has the richest nutrients, so it makes sense to save this where you can. If your topsoil is terrible and it's high in salts and you're not going to be able to get anything to grow, that's infeasible. You don't want to save that layer for revegetation because it's not going to help you meet final stabilization. A lot of oil and gas sites are already required to do this through COG/CC. They scrape off that top layer, they put it into a pile, usually a berm, and they keep it live. That's the same intent here, is to keep that duff, that nutrient-rich top layer to help with final stabilization. Again, if it's infeasible, you have that bad topsoil layer, it's infeasible, and you document that and you don't implement this. Control measures continued. Another federal ELG, minimize the amount of soil exposed during construction, including the disturbance of steep slopes. So again, this is another way to achieve phasing. Steep slopes are going to have higher velocity, higher runoff, so more cause for erosion, and then you're going to have to manage more sediment downstream. Now we're getting away from the erosion and sediment control requirements, and we're going into stabilization requirements. This is another federal ELG, the effluent limitation guideline. Implement temporary stabilization on any disturbed portion of the site where ground disturbing activities has permanently ceased or temporarily ceased for more than 14 days. So that's something you're going to need to document. How active is your site? And again, is it infeasible? I want to show some methods for stabilization. Everybody out here is, I see a lot of this works really well, the ripping or roughening. Mulching, tracking, terracing. These are all examples of what you could use to meet those temporary stabilization requirements. So that's anything where you've ceased construction activity or you're no longer working in that area for 14 days. Continuing on with stabilization requirements. Final stabilization must be designed and installed as a permanent feature. Seems pretty practical, common sense. But a lot of times people will plant rye or some quick growing vegetation just to get it established, and then when they walk away, it dies and it doesn't come back up. So you want to think about that. Work with NRCS, your local folks. They would probably have really good ideas for seed mixes that are going to grow in this type of climate. So for permanent features. There's a guidance document available on the division's website for alternatives for vegetation. So what if you have a road that's compacted and you're going to keep that road? If it's compacted and you don't have potential for erosion, it can meet this requirement for stabilization. I want to touch on concrete washout areas. Implement control measures designed for concrete washout. No change in this permit. Washout activities must not contribute pollutants to stormwater runoff or receiving waters. So you don't want to have a discharge off your site. It's an allowable discharge to the ground. Here's the big change for concrete washout, however. Discharges that may reach groundwater must flow through soil that has buffering capacity Prior to reaching groundwater, concrete washout should not be located in an area where shallow groundwater may be present. So look at your depth of groundwater. A lot of your site assessments are going to have a good estimate of depth to groundwater. Also, how close are you working to the stream? Are you within 50 feet? Most installation and implementation specifications are going to require you to be further than 50 feet. Or if you're 50 feet from a stream, that you line it. So look at your installation, implementation specifications, your design standards, and also look at the type of soil that you have. The permit does authorize discharges to the ground of concrete washout. However, this is in the permit to provide clarity. The previous permit said discharges to the ground of concrete washout water from washing of tools and concrete mixer chutes may be authorized by the permit, provided that the source is identified in the stormwater management plan and control measures are included in the stormwater management plan to prevent pollution of groundwater. So your control measures must be good engineering, hydrologic, and pollution control practices. Again, your design criteria is usually going to talk about the location to the receiving stream, how close you are, and if you need to put a liner. The permit recommends that you use a washout site that is temporary, so less than 1 year. And the reason for that is to help with impacts to groundwater. I'm going to look at time real quick. We could stop here. Our plan was to stop about 2 to do a break. I could go over questions on the first half of the presentation before I go into the plan requirements, which would be site map, stormwater management plan, and site inspections. You guys have any questions? It's 2-year, 24-hour storm event. That's what most control measures are designed for. Next question? We'll get both of you.
I must have the adequate as well. Will we be required to have calculations on site for that?
It could be an estimate. So when I get into the site inspections, it's going to talk about you have to document what your estimated area disturbance is, and that's going to be a good indicator of what control and how much of a control measure is going to be adequate. So using those estimates of disturbance.
Stream crossing isn't defined within the permit. Can you provide the is it?
I'm going to talk about that in the next section a little bit. That's a good question. Any other questions? Okay, I'll go through the site management, and then we'll take a break at 2. Maybe we'll get out a little bit early today. Okay, stormwater management plan requirement changes. The stormwater management plan, it hasn't changed as far as it needs to be a living document. So it needs to be reflective of current site conditions. You're going to come up with a plan, and then as the site changes, because construction is very dynamic, the plan's going to change. You must maintain a record of those changes, including the date and identification of those changes. So that's a new requirement. This can be done by a log. If you're doing your records electronically, that's fine. If you have a software system that tracks your dates of when you change something on your site map or your stormwater management plan, that would be fine as well. Some CDOT already does require this, so they have dates of when things have been changed, and if you're working on a CDOT project, you'd already meet the intent of this general permit. You want to retain the plan on site. The plan must be available for request. And again, you can use a log for the changes or red lines as well. So that would meet the intent. Qualified stormwater manager, a new term. Previously, it was a stormwater management plan administrator. Now we've gone to a qualified stormwater manager. The definition of a qualified stormwater manager is an individual knowledgeable in the principles and practices of erosion and sediment control and pollution prevention, and with the skills to assess conditions at construction sites that could impact stormwater quality and to assess the effectiveness of stormwater controls implemented to meet the requirements of the permit. So somebody who is knowledgeable. Training is not required, but recommended. So classes like this that you're here today, learning about the general permit, going through the slides again that are available, taking the training classes coming this week through Rocky Mountain Education Center and the 521 Drainage Authority, those are all ways that you meet the intent of that qualified stormwater manager. There's also the CDOT training, the TECS, SISEC, Certified Inspector of Sediment and Erosion Control, AGC, that's the Associated General Contractors, they have training. There's also a lot of consultants that provide training. So as long as you have training, you know the expectations, you're familiar with stormwater and the requirements of the permit, you meet the intent of the qualified stormwater manager. The plan content, these are still the same. You have spill prevention and response plan, materials handling for potential sources of pollutant, implementation of control measures, design specifications are required. That hasn't changed. We've always required installation and implementation specifications. There's a guidance available, and I have some copies here on the Stormwater Management Plan. It's a guidance document. The attachment A is a cross-reference that talks about changes from past permit to new permit. So I'd say Appendix A is the best, easiest go-to for what I need to do to change my plan. We also have a guidance document if you want to come up with your own control measure. Certain site conditions, you may not want to use something that's CDOT or Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, and that's okay. This permit allows for that. As long as you meet, there's a few things you want to look at. So adequately sized, how is it maintained, what is it designed, what is the intent of this control measure? So look at that guidance. It's really good, and it's something the division has never had before. One big change, if you have off-site control measures, you want to have use agreements. So a lot of times you might have a developer and multiple builders, and they might be using a laydown yard that's off-site, and they have shared controls for that laydown yard. Now the permit requires use agreements. So who's responsible for what? At the end of the day, that only helps everybody. So and there's no finger pointing. It's their job to clean it. They are responsible for paying for it. You have use agreements in place, and that's required in the documentation. Site description continued. So same things, nature of construction activity, a proposed schedule, acreage of disturbance, soil erosion data, percent of existing vegetation ground cover. The new change is that there's a method required. You want to talk about your method for calculating the percent density. So pre-existing vegetation. The division's coming up with a guidance. We'll have it available by April 1st on different ways to calculate that percent density. We don't have a specific methodology, but we're going to give examples of ways like transects and measurements and photographs. How do you know what was previous site conditions? Here we're getting into the all streams crossing. So your documentation, you want to have a description of all stream crossings. They have to be discussed that are located within the construction site boundary. And this is important because those stream crossings are potential places for discharges. It could be your outfalls, where stormwater is leaving your site and going directly into estate water. So it's important that you know where these are, they're evaluated, they're discussed, and people know to go in the plan and see, okay, what are you doing to control this?
Would it be a blue line on the topo, or is it the dry arroyos?
It's dry arroyos too. Mm-hmm. Yep, and you can do it that way. You can have it, mapped out. You could have it written on there. It's just as long as it meets the intent that they're called out and they're discussed. We know in the site description section we have 4 stream crossings. We go across Sandy Wash on the northeast corner and Sandy Wash on the southwest corner of our site. Okay, so the site map requirements. Again, everything in yellow is what's new. Big thing is now you're required to do flow arrows. A lot of folks did this already. Definitely if you were working on a CDOT project, you had a flow arrow. But it's important to know the direction of stormwater on your site, because you want to know down gradient where you're going to put a control. Springs, streams, wetlands, and other state waters. These are areas that may require that pre-existing vegetation, that 50 feet from the receiving water. So you want to identify these on the map. Again, it could be the key code where it's blue. Everything in blue is a crossing or state water, or you could highlight it on there and write it on there. So get creative, just as long as you meet the intent and you have it available. Locations of all stream crossings located within the construction site boundary again. So really getting you to focus on where do you have the potential stormwater discharges going to state water. Getting into final stabilization. Discuss practices used to achieve final stabilization for all disturbed areas at the site. Plan practices to control pollutants and stormwater discharges that will occur after construction operations are completed. So here we're talking about what are your permanent controls. There's no change in vegetation. It's the second bullet. It provides clarity. Need to discuss those post-construction control measures like your permanent ponds and your collection systems. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. If we have questions, I think we probably have about 5 minutes before 2. Okay, we got 10 minutes. You wanted, yep.
Where's the limit? Is it like what's Army Corps jurisdictional?
No, it's because Army Corps is a federal government.
Well, yeah, but you said like even dry streams or streams. I mean, what do you consider?
So it'd be state waters. So state waters is anywhere water moving through and in the state, which is a dry arroyo, a ditch. So we're not, jurisdictional would be federal government, and that's when you would, if you're doing work in that area, have the 404. We're another level down from that, so it's state waters. And state waters is defined as any water moving in and through the state. And especially in this area, you're gonna have a lot of dry arroyos, where you're only gonna see flows during runoff or rain events or snowmelt events. Great point.
State waters are more stringent, their definitions, and
Yep. So I'm going to say that just so we can hear it on the recording. State waters are more stringent than federal, and they could be dry. Just because they're dry doesn't mean it's not a state water. It's the potential for water to flow through and in the state. It is more stringent. Thank you.
Perhaps you already said this, but what are the requirements for those stream crossings when looking at your management plan?
You want to talk about them. So they just have to be described. So where they are, because your site map, there's a requirement for the site map. So you're locating them on the site map. And then in the plan, you're talking about, am I doing any disturbance within a stream? It's all going to be site specific, because you might have a stream flowing through or an arroyo flowing through, but you're not disturbing anything around there. That's what you'd want to say. If you're going down in and you're disturbing, you're doing stream work, what control measures do you have in place? Do you have any other permits? Do you have a construction dewatering permit? Talk about that, reference that. Any other questions? All right, let's take a break. We'll come back in 2:05. All right, let's go ahead and get started. It's a little after 2:05. We'll get into the second half of the presentation. Hoping everybody got a good break, walked around. I know this is pretty dry material. So the next half, I'm going to go through site inspections and the documentation requirements for site inspections, and then some of the administrative stuff, focusing and ending with the online application system. Okay, the site inspections. They have to be conducted by the qualified stormwater manager, and I went over that definition. So you go through training, you're familiar with stormwater and control measures, you can be a qualified stormwater manager and do the site inspections and sign the inspection records. So the definition again is an individual knowledgeable in the principles and practices of erosion and sediment control and pollution prevention, and with the skills to assess conditions at construction sites that could impact stormwater quality and to assess the effectiveness of stormwater controls implemented to meet the requirements of the permit. So if you meet that, you can conduct the inspections and sign the inspection records. Okay, new requirement. An inspection must be conducted within 7 calendar days of the start day of construction. So within the first week you broke ground, you got to do an inspection. The calendar days are every consecutive day on the calendar. So this includes holidays and weekends. So take that into account when you're setting up your inspection schedule. Inspection frequency, this is a big change. There's a few options, or 2 options in the renewal permit. Option 1 is to perform a routine site inspection every 7 calendar days. If you go option 1, you're not performing post-storm inspections. So you're just on this every 7-day cycle. Again, keep in mind, stormwater doesn't take a holiday. So calendar days are every consecutive day on the calendar, including holidays and weekends. So you got to incorporate your holidays into your 7-day inspection calendar. If a routine inspection falls on a holiday and an inspection will not be completed that day, you want to conduct your inspection prior to the holiday. And that way you avoid being out of compliance with your site inspection frequency. So that's option 1. Option 2 is what was in the previous permit. So you pick your path. Option 2 is a routine site inspection every 14 days and post-storm. Post-storm event inspections must be conducted within 24 hours after the end of the precipitation event or snowmelt event that caused surface erosion. So not just looking at weather conditions at DIA, really knowing how your soil conditions are, what your specific site conditions are, and your storm frequency. Did it rain there? Is it snowing? Here you guys got a few inches this morning. It's pretty sunny. You're already getting snow melt. So you might have a potential for post-storm event inspection after a day like today. Again, stormwater doesn't take a holiday. So calendar days are every consecutive day on the calendar, including holidays and weekends. And again, the holidays must be incorporated into your schedule. If that routine inspection falls on a holiday, plan ahead and conduct your inspection earlier rather than later. If you do later, you'll be out of compliance. So you get to pick what works best for you. We had a lot of feedback on this when we did our public notice, because a lot of folks, if you're a consultant, you're running around that day of that post-storm event inspection, and you might be trying to hit, I don't know, a couple, 10 sites in one day, maybe more. So now you pick a lot more. So that was a pretty hard day. And now you can do that 7-day, and you don't have to do the post-storm. And hopefully that 7-day, with that cycle, it's more proactive. You know, you can take a proactive approach. You're not waiting for something to fail. You know, you're seeing it on a regular basis. Inspection frequency, this is outstanding waters. This is new in the permit. People in the room, have you heard of outstanding waters? Okay, some folks. I know some of our newer inspectors are like, outstanding waters, what is that? Because you don't see it very often. It's not that common in the state of Colorado. If you're going to be in Rocky Mountain National Park, if you're working with an outstanding water. But if you're with an outstanding water, or you think you might be in an outstanding water, the Water Quality Control Division does have resources online. This is a snapshot from our website. You can go to this website and see where outstanding waters are located. If you're doing activity in an area that discharges to outstanding waters, you have to be on that 7-day inspection frequency. Now let's get into inspection reports, the actual documentation themselves. A few changes to the documentation requirements. Now you need to document weather conditions. So during your inspection, what is the weather? Could be as simple as it's sunny, it's rain, approximate temperature. And that's getting you to think, it's frozen today, tomorrow, or next 7 days, it's going to be warmer, the conditions are going to be changing at your site. So weather plays a really important role, obviously, when we're talking about stormwater. Again, keep it simple, just sunny, rainy, frozen, grounds covered with snow. That would work. Inspection reports, again, the documentation requirements. You're required to document the phase of construction. Examples would be, we're clearing, we're grubbing, we're at utilities, we're vertical, we're installing landscaping, or we're at final stabilization and we're waiting for the grass to grow. So it's really important how active you are. Obviously, if you're at the vertical stage, things could get pretty messy out there. If you're waiting for final stabilization, there's not a whole lot of activity. There shouldn't be any activity, so a lot less pollutant sources on your site. Another documentation requirement, the estimated acreage of disturbance. And this plays into, we talked about it earlier, when you're talking about your control measures and having them adequately sized, your areas of disturbance definitely play into, is my control measure sized appropriately? A lot of those have thresholds based on areas of drainage and areas of disturbance draining to that control measure. This estimate, it can be an estimation, a rough estimate, but should be reflective of current site conditions. So you don't want to say 5 acres of disturbance when you got 100 acres disturbed. If you're off by an acre or two, that's a pretty big jump, but you know, we're not out there very rarely with a wheel, and if you're within a couple acres, your potential pollutant source is not changing that much. So how much is currently disturbed? You wouldn't want to include the areas stabilized, so your paved areas and landscaped areas. Continue with documentation for site inspections.
I'm sorry,
Yep.
can I go back to
Yeah.
that last slide?
Sure.
You said do not include areas of that if it was stabilized. Okay. Thank you.
Into your estimated disturbance.
Got it.
So for your inspection reports, you want to write down what option you're on. So did I pick path 1, where I'm doing a 7-day inspection frequency, or am I on option 2, 14-day post-storm? Or are you conducting inspections at completed sites? Completed sites, you're doing an inspection every 30 days. If you're winter exclusion, you're halting until those winter conditions subside. It's pretty rare in Colorado if you're under the winter exclusion, because you have to have no potential for erosion. And here in Colorado, especially in this portion of the state, our temperatures fluctuate. So we have snow in the morning, we're getting a melt in the afternoon. So it's pretty rare.
I get a lot of questions about that. The permit specifically says construction activities have to be halted.
Correct.
And even though we're covered, we're still working.
Yep.
Even if it's 20 below, no threat for erosion, I still got to do it.
You still have to do your inspections. That's a great point, because that has not changed in this renewal permit, is that construction activities have to halt to meet that winter exclusion. So again, it's pretty rare. We often see it up some sites in like Summit County, Vail, high altitude, where there's just so much snow and they're choosing not to work. Definitely in the Front Range and probably most areas throughout the state, we want to get our project done. So we're still working in all sorts of conditions because we've got a timeline and we want to get this done in that timeline. So if you're working, you don't meet the winter exclusion. So making sure that you know what you're on, and for that option 1, option 2, you actually can switch back and forth. And what you want to make sure is that you're documenting which one you're on and what you're doing. If you deviate from any of those inspection frequencies, you also want to document. So if you miss one, you had an inspection on Memorial Day and everybody was on vacation and you were a day late, you want to document that and why. Okay. So inspection reports, they must document any locations of control measures needing maintenance. This is the maintenance versus corrective action items, which is a little tricky. I'm not going to lie. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. Maintenance, think true maintenance. I've talked a lot, or I've mentioned your installation and implementation specifications, your design criteria. They often have thresholds for maintenance. So if you have a silt fence or a straw wattle and you have some sediment, but it's less than half the height of that feature, you're in the maintenance world. If you're more than half the height, you're in corrective action world. So is my control measure going to fail? Think corrective action. So your inspections must document those locations where you're identifying any inadequate control measure. Again, one thing I want to point out here in this area of the state, you guys use a lot of berms. So, is there some sediment behind the berm? It's maintenance. Do I have a blowout? Your corrective action. And I'm going to go through that more in detail. But you document your locations and identification of inadequate control measures. Maintenance versus inadequate, a few more examples. So on the right-hand side, maintenance. So a silt fence sloughing. Can it still function? Can it still hold sediment to half the height and perform as intended? Yes. So we want to think ahead. We're proactive. We're going to be in the maintenance world. On the right-hand side, it's inadequate. It's corrective action. Because you have your silt fence right up against that toe or stockpile. Can that silt fence ever perform as it's intended to function? Absolutely not. So corrective action item. So let's go into the definition of the two of them. Okay. Maintenance. The definition of maintenance, and this is all in the permit, and I said the permit has those linked, really neat linked definitions. Control measures still operating in accordance with this design and the requirements of the permit. So look at your design details. It requires maintenance to prevent the breach of the control measure. Again, that example of removing sediment from behind a sediment control log when it's less than half the height of that control log. Maintenance actions, when you're identifying those, they're not subject to corrective actions. Only the identification of inadequate control measures. So let's get into what is an inadequate control measure. The definition. Control measures not designed or implemented in accordance with the requirements of its design and or permit. So go back to that example right here. So when you look at your design criteria, whether you're at CDOT or urban drainage, it's going to say you want 5 feet from the toe slope because you want that sloughing, you want to be able to hold that sediment. It's never going to work in this case. You're always going to have failure of that control measure, so it's inadequate. An example of an inadequate control measure or something that you're identifying as inadequate, removing sediment from behind a sediment control log when it's more than half the height. So you're going to have failure. You're going to have overtopping. If you are identifying an inadequate control measure, you're implementing corrective action items immediately. That's what the permit says. It's a straight out of the permit. The permittee is not in compliance with the permit until an inadequate control measure is replaced or corrected. If you can't do that corrective action item right away, immediately, what you have to do is use a temporary control measure to minimize or prevent the discharge of pollutants until you can perform that corrective action item. So what else can you do in the meantime? Can you build another berm down gradient? Can you install, I have a whole row of sediment control logs, straw wattle. I'm going to put this down until I can fix what I need to get fixed. Continuing on with corrective actions. If it's infeasible to install or repair the control measure immediately after discovering the deficiency, the following must be documented. Describe why it's infeasible to initiate the installation or repair immediately, and then provide a schedule for installing or repairing the control measure and returning it to an effective operating condition as soon as possible. So really important here, we're driving these changes through the plan, through your documentation. So you're describing what you're doing in the meantime. Schedules and actions. Corrective action items continued. Required to clean up any contaminated surface, remove and properly dispose of any unauthorized release or discharge. So think spills and leaks, concrete waste, and sediment releases. Here's some examples. Before I go on to the administrative, I definitely want to point to our Stormwater Management Plan guidance document, the appendix. If you don't need to make any changes to your Stormwater Management Plan or you've already done them, there's also links to the appendixes separately from the Stormwater Management Plan guidance document. There's a self-inspection that the division put together. It's the first time that the division has ever given an example of how to document self-inspection records. It's awesome.
I downloaded that last one. This one became available, and Appendix D, which is the inspection form, wasn't available at that time.
It is now.
Okay.
Yep, it's now. So we came out first with a guidance document, and we kind of left blanks, and then we got everything out on Friday. So all the appendixes are there now, and the links work. I want to bring that up because that self-inspection has documentation for maintenance and corrective action items. So use that as a resource. You don't have to use it if your consultant or your MS4 has a inspection record that they want you to use it. Just cross-reference just to make sure you have everything in the state's inspection record, because our document's going to have all the permit requirements, all the documentation requirements. I have some copies here. I didn't bring 40 or 50 because I just want to encourage to use online resources where they're available. Okay, the administrative requirements and changes. This is application, turnaround times, owner, operator. Okay, application requirements. So still, you're required to apply 10 days prior to the start of construction activity. That hasn't changed. There is a change for emergency sites. We've had a lot of emergency situations, whether it's a fire or flood, the 2013, 2015 floods, where folks just need to get in and do the work. You still can do that. However, you have to apply no more than 14 days after the commencement of that construction activity. So it still allows you to respond to that emergency situation, but you have to apply, and there's a time limit on that now. This was not previously spelled out, and when we got into those emergency situations, we often had to scramble and put information up on the web. So now it's just all spelled out in the permit. Owner, operator. This is a big change in the renewal permit. So both the owner and operator are required to apply and have their names and signatures on the permit. In some cases, the owner and operator are going to be the same person, and that's okay. The owner of the activity is not the owner of the land. And what you're applying, it's the owner of the activity. That's what we mean by owner. Both the owner and the operator are responsible for ensuring compliance with all terms and conditions of the permit, including implementation of a stormwater management plan. This increases accountability of the owners. So it gets the owner and operator engaged in compliance with stormwater management. I had a hand in the back.
So the owner could be the contractor, the operator could be the sub that's doing environmental control also?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So, like if you have a land lease, some of the environmental stuff that I've done, it requires that you have the owner sign it. This way you don't have to have it. It's whoever's operating on the property, correct?
The owner of the activity. Yep, but it also could be the owner of the land too, if they are the same. But they would be required to sign an electronic signature with the application and have their name on the permit. I'm going to go on. I have a few more slides on owner-operator. Okay, the owner, they're the overall control of the activities. They're the funded portion of the activities, the implementation of construction plans and specifications, so they have control over the funds. So this is kind of what you're thinking about when you're assessing who meets owner. Party with ownership of, a long-term lease of, or easements on the property on which the construction activity is occurring. One common example is going to be a developer. So they may be the owner. Yep. Let's get into operator. So operator, they're the ones that have the operational control over the day-to-day activities. So site super in some cases might be the operator. A sub might be the operator. A commercial developer, going to be the operator. Semi-custom homeowner, or I'm sorry, home builder in a larger development would be the operator. It could be the general contractor, site super, site manager in some cases. Application requirements continued. So during the application, you're certifying that a stormwater management plan is complete or will be complete prior to the commencement of any construction activity. So that's a change. With a previous application, you were signing that you had one done already. Now you just need to have one done prior to the commencement of construction activity. Plans for public emergency sites, they shall be created no more than 14 days. So again, I talked about that 14-day. You want to make sure that you have your plan in place within that 14-day time frame for flood conditions, emergency response, 14 days. So the change from having a stormwater management plan done prior to construction activity versus application. All written notice of certifications on April 1st is going to be through CEOS. It's an online application system. Wanted to go through some examples because this is going to be a big change, difference in signatory requirements. So for the application, owner-operator, both must sign. It's going to be an electronic requirement, electronic signature. Self-inspection reports, it's that qualified stormwater manager. And then attachment A. Attachment A is when the Water Quality Control Division is asking for documentation. If we want to review your stormwater management plan or we're coming on site to do an inspection, we're going to send you a attachment A to sign. That could be a qualified stormwater manager. I had a question in the back.
We may have 80 projects, myself and John Woodfire in the Front Range as the qualified stormwater manager. And as technicians, they will be doing weekly inspections. When I travel to visit those sites, I will sign these inspections. If the compliance unit does an inspection and those inspections are not signed at that time, are we out of compliance?
You would be. Yep. Because we would view that as you want to have your inspection signed when you come back into compliance. So if it's not signed, we see that as it's out of compliance. So the best thing to do for a qualified stormwater manager, it could be many people. And really giving that power and empowering a few people within your company to be a qualified stormwater manager. That means train a few people. Have a few people on staff that know how to conduct inspections, that can fill in, that can actually sign this documentation. Absolutely. I would recommend it. That's great. You're having a team approach. Just again, making sure that they really meet that definition of qualified stormwater manager. So they spent the week here in Grand Junction going through classes. They've taken some certifications. They know how to conduct inspections. If you're using software, they know how to use the software, that they really can meet that qualified stormwater manager. But absolutely, and I would encourage that. So signatory requirements, owner-operator, big takeaway, and really start talking about this now, because when it comes April 1st, it's going live. Again, I really wanted to stress that difference of roles within the division, because I'm in the compliance staff, and I didn't create this online system. I'm testing it myself now to see how it works, because I know I'm going to get a lot of questions, because I'm definitely a face of the division and I'm out in the field, so I better know how this stuff works. And it's going to be a little clunky. If anybody is or holds a construction dewatering permit now, we are live with the online management system now. So talk to those folks if they've gone through the application process through construction dewatering, and you can get a sense of how they signed up, how they assigned the different roles and responsibilities. I'm going to go through a little bit on that online system, and we'll definitely have more to come as this starts getting rolled out and up and running on April 1st. Before I go into CEOs, qualifying local programs, that's something that this permit does allow. There's only 3 qualified local programs right now in the state of Colorado. That's Lakewood, the municipality up in the Front Range, Durango, and Golden. So if you're working in one of those areas and you have a small construction site, 1 to 5 acres, if you apply through the city, you get that permit through the state permit through them. The previous permit didn't have all the right language, so we updated the language and made sure that all sites comply with the permit requirements that are more stringent. So if that local qualified program has more stringent requirements, they have to comply with those. So it's more clear language. Again, don't need to worry about that on this side of the divide. Sale of residence to homeowners. Again, the change is in yellow on the slide. The permittee is not responsible for final stabilization. So this is when you have multiple lots in a development and you're selling a lot to a homeowner. There's a couple of conditions that have to be met. You want to modify your permit. If you're over an acre, you're going to submit an actual modification to reflect the acreage of your permit coverage. If you're under an acre, just update it on the map. It's outside of my area of disturbance. It's outside of my operational control. This lot is sold off. But when you start reaching that acre, you want to modify. This allows the contractor basically to terminate coverage by removing that completed home from the permitted area. All lots that have been completed and sold should be marked on the active site map. Always need to update the plan and site map to identify these lots sold and removed from permit construction site boundary. And there's requirements. You have to have a CO. You know, there's things in place, but it is a way for these lots to get sold off and out of that developer or builder's control. Transfer permit coverage. This is just some clear language that we've added to the general permit. A lot of times with transfers, it's very hard to get those signature requirements. The person doesn't want to take responsibility for the permit. So now we made it pretty clear. If the owner or operator cannot obtain a signature from the newly responsible owner or operator, they can provide to the division proof of due diligence to obtain those signatures, along with a notice of termination request form. So if you've tried and tried and tried and you're just not getting any response, send that information to the division. We'll terminate your permit coverage, and we'll pursue that entity as a non-filer. So they'll get a compliance advisory, and we'll go that route. In the past, that was a policy. It just wasn't written in the permit. Okay, this is the brochure that I have with me. It's also available on the website. We also send it out in an email to permitted entities. It just talks about what to do in this weird phase between it being renewed but not effective, so it's issued but not effective. Basically, just start looking at what changes you need to make to your stormwater management plan to come into compliance with the renewal permit. Do I need to update any forms, site maps? Start making those changes. Do I need to implement any changes in the field? As far as getting a new certification, do you need to send in a new application? Do you need to contact the division? Nope. We're going to send you a new certification after April 1st with a new permit number. Let's see. Yep, you'll automatically be issued a certification under the renewal, so you don't need to reapply. Question in the back.
How many years is that going to be good for? My situation is just spending year after year.
When was the last time you applied? Do you know?
Mainly, this is going to affect all the gravel pits I got to cover. They never terminate those. But I have one gravel pit with water in them, and they do it 5 years.
If you submitted a renewal, so this permit's been under administrative extension for a really long time. So I said since 2012. If you have a renewal application on file from 2012, you're going to be issued a new certification without having to do anything.
And the new designation for this, what we're covering, do we have to do it every 5 years or how long? Most of the people's situation, within a year or two, they get rid of it.
It is every 5 years. Every 5 years. That's still the same. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. It's every 5 years is a requirement. It's a regulation that we have to reissue our general permits. And if we don't, because of resource reasons or constraints or another reason, the application process is still a requirement. So it's every 5 years you'll need to reapply if you want permit coverage. Some other folks like sand and gravel and oil and gas sites, they typically have permits for years and years and years because it covers a large area. Or like a sand and gravel site, it's a fixed facility. So it'll be every 5 years. We'll send out notices. So this goes effect in April of 2018. It's going to be 5 years from now. But we'll send you emails. We'll send you notifications. We'll give you plenty of advance notice to say, hey, you need to reapply. But for this permit, you'll be issued a certification. Like I said, I have that brochure with me. It's also available on the website. Any information that we have coming up, we're trying to get it out to folks as quickly as possible. CEOs. This is what I'm expecting to have a lot of questions on. This is the online management system. So this is applying online, having that owner and operator in the system and getting prepared to submit this, get your information. Any transfers, modifications after April 1st, it's going to be through the online system. Okay. So why are we doing this to ourselves? It's just time. I mean, there's many reasons. We've heard from public, just really folks want to be able to apply online to get up to times. It will allow us to issue certifications quicker. With the construction dewatering, it's been live I think 2.5 months now. They're getting certifications in a day. That's if all the information is complete and things are working smoothly. Probably your first application's not going to be within a day, but once you get into the system, get familiar with it, we can turn around those certifications really quickly. So it's a benefit. Also, it's a federal requirement. It's EPA CROMAIR compliant. Something we got called out for on an audit that we had through the EPA is that we weren't compliant with their rules and regulations, that we have to have all this information online, and that we're checking if that responsible official, the permittee, truly meets the requirements of a responsible official. So we have to do this. It's live it's going to be implemented for all areas of compliance, not just construction stormwater. So grants and loans, if you're getting a loan through the Water Quality Control Division, it would be through CEOs. The permits, the first permit that we went live with was construction dewatering. The next one's construction stormwater. This is our biggest. I said 4,800 certifications, so it's a beast. It's going to be a big change for a lot of folks. After we do it through construction and stormwater, our intent is to go live with individual permits. So if you have individual permit application, it's going to be online. Compliance and enforcement, that's another piece of this program that we can use COs to do our inspections, and also engineering reviews. Our Air Quality Control Division is using it now, so it's an incorporated system where we can go online, you can see all the permits that you have, if it's air, if it's water, so it's just an integrated system. I mentioned the quicker issuance, and then another thing is consistency. So a lot of times when we go through applications and I'm going to inspect a site, I want to know where you're located, and I'm going to your lat and long. There's no check on that. It's a paper application now. I can't tell you how many times I've put that latitude and longitude into our ArcGIS, and it's in another country. So with this Chrome Air application, there's actually going to be a map that will verify, is this your location? So we're going to have accurate information, which is great. Same thing with receiving streams. We have links to where your discharges are, what your receiving stream is. So it's going to really help you get that information you need to submit a complete and accurate application. Okay, so getting in and kind of playing around with it. Unfortunately, it's not live for construction stormwater. It's only live for construction dewatering. So if you're looking for information on COs, follow construction dewatering on our website. That will get you to COs. You can get in there, you can create an account. Creating an account, there's directions under construction dewatering on how to create an account and how to assign responsible official, RO, which is owner operator, or a preparer. So what role are you going to be? A preparer, think consultant. If you are a preparer, you can't be an RO. If you're an RO, you can be a preparer and an RO. So if you can, you meet the requirements of a responsible official, an owner operator, I would sign up as an RO. That gives you a lot more flexibility and use within the system. Let's see, what else? So create an account. I mentioned the EPA Chrome Air compliance. So it actually does a check on who you are. When I was testing, I put in my information, and it took about an hour to make sure I'm truly Maura McGovern. So that's how it's that EPA Chrome Air compliant. So when you're getting into the system, we found this a lot with people testing. It's going to ask you for your information, your address. Put your personal address, because it's checking out who you are, not what company you work for. So a lot of people get caught up with that, and they don't know if they're through or validated. So making sure you put your own personal information, because it's cross-checking who you are. Again, there's directions online on how to sign up and go through getting into the system.
For us, we have one account. Inside of that, I assign my officers of the corporation as ROs, or do each of them need to have an account?
Each of them have to have an account. Each have to have an account. You could set it up however you want. If you want one person for your company to do it, or if you want to delegate and have multiple folks, you can do that as well. But they need to get into the system, have their identification verified, and set up as a role. That's a good question. Again, there is an online tutorial. There's also directions if you don't want to go into the system right now and sign up on how to get through and how the basic steps work. I mentioned it's live for dewatering, so if you're a consultant and you work with anybody who issues or does the permitting for dewatering, ask them how it's going, ask them how it worked, get some help, because it's going to be a little funky for a little bit. Creating account, the RO, that responsible official, think permittee, owner, operator. That's the RO. Same as the legal contractor permittee must be able to sign on behalf of the company and agree to any compliance penalties that may be levied, and it can't be a project manager. What I've seen with certain companies, that actually can be a project manager. I've talked to a lot of folks where if their project managers have that responsibility, it's part of their job description, part of their title, then they're in the system as an RO. So it's really up to each company. If they meet that requirement, if you're comfortable with it, they could sign up as an RO. The preparer I mentioned, that's more of the consultant role. So really the person filling out the application and getting the information. They're not able to sign and submit. It will go to the RO to actually sign and submit and have it issued. The preparer can be appointed to prepare applications and other documents. So that's really something that's driven by the responsible official. They assign who the RO is, or I'm sorry, the preparer is. There's a lot of the failing of the E-Verify. That's because people are putting the wrong information. If you have that happen, you can contact the Water Quality Control Division. I have a contact at the end to give you with any questions on COs. Because honestly, I'm testing it and I don't know much more than you guys right now, especially when it comes to owner-operator, because it's new for this permit. We're still in the testing phase, and I don't have all the answers just yet. If someone has a current permit with them as a permittee, we're going to honor that. So it's going to be honored in the system. However, they won't be able to apply again if they're not in the system. So at some point, they're going to need to get into the system and get signed up as an RO if they want to be able to do anything. Again, I mentioned the modifications. You might have permit coverage and it's going to be grandfathered, but what if you need to do a transfer or modification to remove? All of that is going to be through COs as well. So you want to make sure that that contact is in as an RO to do that work. This is kind of just what it looks like. Give you a little feel for it once you're in the system. All communication is sent via email. Right now we're working on getting as much information in that email as possible, because we do realize a lot of people are doing this in the field, which is very different than construction dewatering, where they're not may not be the site super out on site. So we're working with the consultant that created this to get as much information in that email, so they know what permit it is, what facility, and they can do enough on their phone as possible. Once you're on the landing page, the dashboard is usually where you want to go to find your information. If this is where you'll add a facility, you'll have all your permits issued as well. I mentioned this system is being used for not just water quality. So you have air pollution control. If you're a facility like a sand and gravel facility and you have an air permit, you'd see your air permits there for that facility as well. If you have any grants or loans or SARA title requirements, you could do that through COS as well. So it's a landing page to see all information for that facility. So it's an integrated system. This is the dashboard where it will list, so hard to read. I apologize about that. Definitely get the slides from Vera so you can get a sense of how this looks. Also, when you're in and you signed up, that's where you can do that online tutorial where you'll get through some of these pages. Associating a facility to the RO or the preparer, that's something you have to do. So it will walk you through that online tutorial on how to associate. It will also have pending items like submittals that still need a signature, anything that's outdue, or it's a pending or maybe sent back because the information is incomplete, is going to be sitting in this pending area. Information on associating existing facilities. Probably best to go through the online tutorial to really walk yourself through how to use the system. Again, the consultants or preparers think you're a preparer and you can't sign, you can't submit, you can't do the transfer for that permittee anymore. Managing permits, if you have multiple permits for a facility, it's all going to be on the same page. Developer is probably going to have multiple permits if they're an owner, and then there could also be an operator. They're going to see a lot underneath that facility. The application is still in development for construction stormwater. So what does the online application going to look like? It's going to look very similar to what you have right now. The big difference is having 2 owner operators. Again, it could be the same person, but in some cases you're going to have 2 different people, so you're going to have to fill out, an owner and operator. That's going to be the main difference. The dual signature. And again, the verification of that signature is still in development, so I haven't tested it or been able to test it completely, but they're fully confident that everything's going to be going live April 1st, so we're going with that. Talked about available resources. So a lot of guidance out there. Division compliance resources, the best website to use is at www.coloradowaterpermits.com. You bypass the Department of Public Health and go directly to permits. For construction stormwater, construction dewatering, hydrostatic remediation, always follow construction. So construction, construction, construction. Once you hit the construction link, you'll see information on the renewal permit. You got to hit that link to see the renewal permit, the fact sheet, which has all the response to public comments. So that document's pretty large, pretty hefty, and then the guidance documents that are available. So we created a stormwater management plan guidance document. We have a cross-reference between the renewal permit and the old permit. We have a self-inspection checklist with maintenance and inadequate controls. We have a control measure specification guidance. Trying to think, and then a checklist to verify if your stormwater management plan has all the parts and pieces. It's a checklist that we use when we go out and do inspections. So that's in that guidance document as well. We're working on that pre-existing vegetation guidance. We're going to update the oil and gas fact sheet, and probably, I'm hoping, a lot more information on this owner-operator and COs. But there is that online tutorial available. There's a short version and a long version for COs, so I recommend sitting through it. I did. That's how I was able to sign myself up as a responsible official. So just use that. It will really walk you through how to get into COs and get signed up. These are the guidance documents I mentioned. I do have some in the back, but if you're online, please go online and use those resources that are online, and I'll just bring that paper back to the office. All right, that's all I had. It is a lot of information. I gave the copy of the slides to 521, so those will be available. When you follow the link for the guidance documents, we also list the other trainings that we're going to have. The training I mentioned in Denver, you can call in. I definitely recommend calling in. You can sit at your desk, do other work. It's just good to hear this stuff multiple times. It will also be given by somebody else, so maybe you like the sound of their voice, or maybe they just provide a different approach to the information. We are traveling to Durango. We are traveling to Colorado Springs and all over. So if you have some folks in your office and satellite locations, look at that website, see where we're going to be. It's definitely the next month, so we're getting out there and on the road. At the training at the office, we're going to have the one in Denver. We'll have somebody from the administrative services who's implementing COs. So that would be a good place to have your COs questions ready. So really, takeaway from me is to get in and start looking at it. Try to sign up. Try to look through the online tutorial so you can get some questions, and then bring those questions to that Water Quality Control Division. We're going to take questions through the phone, so you can do that remotely. We have a lot of questions. I'm sure you guys are going to have a lot of questions, and we're just really hoping that it's going to work. It might be a struggle. Change is always hard, but we'll get through it, and we'll have faster turnaround times, more accurate information. So in the long run, it's going to be a really good thing, really, really positive. We just got to get through this together. So with that, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to be here later in the week with Scott at some of the trainings. So hopefully you guys are taking part in some of that. I highly encourage sending your folks to these trainings. They're great. We're going to get out in the field. We're going to look at the site. Any questions that come up after today that you're digesting all this information, please bring it there. If you have future questions after digesting this, my business card is here. Please take that. I would suggest emailing me because I am all over the place and sometimes I'm hard to get a hold of via phone. But if you email me, I'll definitely get back to you. And those questions are great because they help us with our Q&A guidance. So any question that you have that I can't answer, I'm definitely going to take back to the office and get an answer. And we'll get as much information out to you guys as possible, especially with this online system. So any questions?
Oil and gas guidance, do you have an estimated release date?
By April 1st. By April 1st, yeah. April 1st for the oil and gas fact sheet and the stabilization. So right now, because we're all on the road doing trainings, we're kind of at a pause with what we can get out, but our goal is April 1st.
Okay. Do you see much changing
No.
in the oil and gas guidance from the original one?
We really don't. We just want to make it come up to speed. And we also have other types of field-wide permits, like if you're a ski resort. So we want to make it relevant for anybody who is field-wide and not just oil and gas. But really not much changes. It's just going to be terminology and talking about owner-operator.
Is there going to be a way to get onto the website to see if the permits have actually been issued? For instance, as consultants, we do a lot of the preparation, but we hand those off to the owner-operator, and they supposedly get those permits shipped to them, and we don't always see that coming back. And is there some way for us to get into that system to see if it has been issued?
I don't know, actually, through CEOs. I do know we put what permits are issued on our website, and that's something we will continue to do. So you can go through our website to see the listing, but through CEOs, I'm not really sure how much information is provided back to that preparer. So that's a good question. Hopefully you documented that. Okay, and we'll get back to you on that one. Pretty scary to kind of have a little, I know there's a lot of consultants in the Front Range that are pretty nervous about this. So that's a really good question.
Maybe you don't have the answer for this in CEOs, but is there a way for multiple people to be assigned to a permit?
I believe as a preparer, yes. Yep. Yep. Yeah, you would have to.
Engineer or whoever filled out that form, they're the only person that can get in to modify or.
They would be able to do the actual submittals as a RO, but as they could associate as many people to that facility as they want. So that could be multiple consultants as the preparer or multiple ROs as the responsible official. Yep. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much for your time. That was a lot of information. Please send questions as they come up, and we'll get them out, get those answers to you. Thanks.